Erik, maybe a good place to start is to take it back to when you joined Netflix in 2011. What immediately struck you about the company's culture?
Well, so in 2011, I was coming from Disney and ESPN, and I liked those roles a lot. But working for ESPN in sports, it was, literally the biggest of the biggest. And so, if you were working in digital media and doing disruptive things, um, I think it was interesting to the company at the time for sure, but it wasn't really going to move the needle compared to big carriage deals and huge sports rights packages and all of that. And when I interviewed at Netflix, like what struck me is that everything that was part of the value proposition that they were developing had to be disruptive. It was like, how do you change the rules of distribution for Hollywood films and movies? And at the time, there were just the inklings of whether you could build to doing original content. Um, um, but all of those things, just from as simple to as digital distribution to whether consumers were going to be interested in on-demand platforms, were largely unproven. And so I met a bunch of smart people who were all trying to answer questions that were largely unknown, which I think was super interesting relative to other um, media companies at the time.
Right, so it was more on the culture of asking those questions and being disruptive.
In the culture deck and all of those things were
Yeah.
designed kind of in Reed's from Reed's perspective as almost more of a Silicon Valley startup than anything else. So there's a lot of kind of tech culture baked into the DNA of the company of trial and error, of being data heavy, of asking for forgiveness, doing things and asking for forgiveness, all that sort of stuff.
And does the company really live by that or those principles?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think in it, for the most part, yes. I mean, I think it's an incredibly bold company where one way of looking at it is the biggest line item is content. And for the most part, relative to other companies in Hollywood, decisions are very distributed. So when I was there, I could make decisions on hundreds of shows being commissioned without really needing a committee to sign off on things. Um, and the same thing was true for people who were building platforms and or people who were starting relationships with carriers and MVNOs and all that. I would say it's harder to keep the purely entrepreneurial spirit as you get bigger. So when I was there at a starting point, there were a couple hundred people, and we were just in the US and had just launched in Canada as a streaming service. And when you're global and you have regional centers and you have a certain size, and I think it's harder to be as nimble as that. But on a relative basis, it's still very, very entrepreneurial and disruptive.
What are the systems in place that enable or that allow such distributed decision making?
Well, I guess it's more like what systems aren't in place.
Mm.
It's like if you're going to make a show on in Italy, and that's a fraction of the budget of a show in Hollywood, um, and you're wrong, what's the cost of being wrong? And how many people really need to opine on that decision? Or is it better just to hire people, have a bunch of people take their shots, and if people aren't making good decisions over time, then that's one thing. But it's more like getting rid of the false comfort that committees are going to be better at making decisions than individuals.
Right. So it's more on if you just hire correctly and give people authority and
Yeah.
also have I think Reed also spoke about his policy with hiring people. And then if it doesn't work out, you can let them go and give them a good package to leave.
Yeah.
All these principles have to fit together to enable you to have distributed decision
Yeah.
making.
Yeah. And I also think just the scale of what Netflix is trying to accomplish. This year they were launching over um, more shows and films on an original basis than days in the year.
Mm.
And so, to do that well, you need a lot of people making decisions. And on the flip side, if you're a Hollywood premium network and you just have 4 or 5 shows, um, those shows really need to be right and they need to be on brand and all those things. So I understand the flip side too, which is that if you're doing something that's much more boutique, you probably need you can't accept failure as easily.